Don't ask her about real estate. She's too stupid to understand. The CEO's words sliced through the ballroom, drawing uneasy laughter from 200 guests. His black wife, Vanessa, stood frozen for a moment, champagne flute trembling in her hand. For a decade, she had endured these jabs, smiles hiding the empire she built in silence. Tonight, under glittering chandeliers, his arrogance reached its peak. But what Michael Warrick didn't know was that Vanessa held the power to shatter not only his pride, but his entire fortune. And with one speech, she did. If stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support the channel. The champagne flute trembled in Vanessa Coleman's hand, its crystal edge catching the golden glow of chandeliers. Her pulse thrummed against her wrist, a silent metronome counting down to something she couldn't yet name. She stood at the edge of the grand room, her red silk dress clinging to her curves like a second skin, the fabric whispering against her thighs with every step. Her mahogany skin gleamed under the soft light, and her coiled hair, swept into an elegant updo, framed the sharp angles of her face. To the guests, over 100 of Chicago's elite, she was the perfect hostess, gliding through the crowd with a smile that promised warmth. But beneath it, her chest tightened, as if her ribs were a cage too small for the storm brewing inside. "Vanessa, darling, you've outdone yourself." A woman in a sequined gown, some heiress whose name Vanessa barely recalled, sipped her drink, her eyes darting to the white roses cascading across the tables. "This party is divine." Vanessa's lips curved, a practiced reflex. "Thank you, Cynthia. I'm glad you're enjoying it." Her voice was smooth, honeyed, but her fingers tightened around the flute's stem. Divine. The word grated. This wasn't divine. It was a performance, one she'd perfected over 10 years of marriage to Michael Warrick. Across the room, Michael held court, his navy suit tailored to his broad shoulders, his blonde hair catching the light like a crown. His laugh boomed, drawing heads like moths to a flame. He was gesturing wildly, recounting the triumph of Warwick Tower, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "A game changer for Chicago," he said, his steel blue eyes glinting with pride. "Took years, but we made it happen." Vanessa's gaze lingered on him, her heart a tangled knot of love and resentment. He was her husband, her partner, the man who'd sworn to cherish her. Yet every word he spoke felt like a brick in the wall between them. She took a sip of champagne, the bubbles sharp against her tongue, and forced her feet to move toward him. "Vanessa!" Michael's voice cut through the chatter as she approached. He slung an arm around her waist, his touch possessive but careless, like a collector displaying a prized artifact. "Here's my beautiful wife, making sure this night is flawless." His smile was wide, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "Isn't she something?" The group, men in crisp suits, women dripping in diamonds, nodded politely. Arthur Klein, Michael's biggest investor, raised his glass. "To Vanessa," he said, his tone warm but curious, as if trying to see past her polished exterior. She inclined her head, her smile unwavering. "Thank you, Arthur." Her voice was a velvet blade, soft but sharp enough to cut through the pretense. She could feel their eyes on her, measuring, judging. The only black woman in this sea of privilege, she'd learned to wear her confidence like armor. But tonight, it felt thin, brittle. "Speaking of flawless," Michael said, his hand tightening on her waist, "we were just discussing the South Side redevelopment. Big plans, huge potential." He turned to Vanessa, his grin teasing. "Vanessa, you should weigh in. What's your take on the market down there?" Her breath caught, a flicker of hope igniting. He rarely asked her opinion, not in front of his peers. She straightened, her mind racing with data. Property values, zoning laws, investment yields. "Southside's undervalued," she began, her voice steady. "With the right infrastructure, it could—" "Oh, Vanessa, love," Michael interrupted, his laugh loud, slicing through her words. "Don't bore them with your half-baked ideas. You're better at spending my money on those cutesy hydrangeas and porcelain trinkets, aren't you?" He winked at the group, who chuckled awkwardly, their eyes darting between them. Her smile froze, her knuckles whitening around the flute. The word ngak echoed in her mind, though he hadn't said it outright. Not yet. But it was there, in his tone, his dismissal, the way he reduced her to a decorative afterthought. Her chest burned, a molten ache spreading to her fingertips. She wanted to scream, to shatter the glass in her hand and let the shards speak for her. Instead, she laughed softly, a sound that tasted like ash. "Michael's right," she said, her voice a perfect mask. "I do love my hydrangeas." The group relaxed, their laughter easing the tension. But Arthur's gaze lingered, his brow furrowed as if he'd caught a glimpse of something beneath her facade. She excused herself, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she moved toward the open doors to the garden. The cool night air hit her skin, a fleeting relief. Her reflection in the glass doors stared back, poised, radiant, untouchable. But inside, her heart pounded like a war drum. 10 years. 10 years of swallowing his jabs, of hiding the empire she'd built in the shadows. The numbers flashed in her mind. $2.3 billion, 60% of Warrick Realty's projects, her silent kingdom. She'd let him shine, let him believe he was the sun. But tonight something shifted. The weight of her silence was too heavy, the cost too high. Her fingers brushed the silk of her dress, grounding her. She turned back, catching Michael's silhouette against the golden light, his voice still dominating the room. He was building to something, she could feel it. A bigger stage, a sharper jab. Her pulse quickened, not with fear but with clarity. The storm inside her was no longer content to stay caged. It was clawing, raging, ready to break free. As she stepped back into the room, her eyes locked on Michael's. He was raising his glass, his grin wide, oblivious to the precipice they stood on. "To 10 years," he called out, his voice ringing with triumph. "And to my wife, who makes it all look so easy." The crowd applauded, but Vanessa's smile was a blade, honed and ready. She raised her glass in return, her gaze never leaving his. The air between them crackled, a silent warning. "Tonight," she thought, "you'll see what I'm made of." Vanessa stood alone by the window, the lake's dark shimmer a mirror to the turmoil roiling in her chest. Her fingers pressed against the cool glass, grounding her as Michael's laughter echoed from the room behind. Each chuckle was a pinprick, sharp and deliberate, stirring the embers of a fire she'd banked for a decade. She closed her eyes and the past rushed in, unbidden, like a tide she could no longer hold back. She was 24 again, standing in a vacant Southside lot, the air thick with dust and possibility. Her first investment, a crumbling parcel no one else wanted, was bought with savings scraped from a scholarship and late-night waitressing shifts. She'd pored over zoning laws, her dorm room littered with spreadsheets, her mind alight with numbers that danced like poetry. That lot became a cornerstone, a seed that grew into a $2.3 billion empire, woven through shell companies and silent partnerships. She'd built it all, 60% of Warrick Realty's projects, including Michael's precious Warrick Tower. While he slept soundly, believing her world revolved around him, her eyes snapped open, the memory fading as a guest's clinking glass pulled her back. She turned, her red silk dress catching the light, and scanned the room. Michael was still holding court, his arm gesturing grandly, his voice a drumbeat of self-assurance. "The market's ours," he was saying, "because we see what others miss." The irony burned her throat like bile. "We," he said, as if she hadn't handed him the keys to his kingdom. "Vanessa," Arthur Klein's voice broke through her thoughts. The older man approached, his silver hair glinting, his smile warm but probing. "You've been quiet tonight. Something on your mind?" Her lips curved, a reflex honed by years of deflection. "Just enjoying the evening, Arthur." Her voice was smooth, but her pulse betrayed her, thudding against her ribs. She could tell him now, spill the truth about her empire, the contracts, the billions. But the weight of 10 years held her tongue. 10 years of letting Michael shine, of swallowing his dismissals to keep their marriage intact. Arthur leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "You know, I've always thought you had a sharp mind for this game. Ever consider dipping your toes into investments? Southside, maybe?" Her breath hitched, a spark of validation igniting. She opened her mouth, ready to share a fraction of her truth. "Actually, I've been following Southside closely. The data suggests—" "Oh, Arthur, don't get her started." Michael's voice boomed, cutting her off as he strode over, a whiskey glass in hand. His grin was wide, but his eyes were cold, a warning wrapped in charm. Vanessa's talents lie elsewhere, like spending my money on those fancy hydrangeas and porcelain knickknacks. Leave the real estate talk to us, darling. The words landed like a slap, her skin prickling as if stung. The group around them, men in tailored suits, women in glittering jewels, shifted uncomfortably, their laughter thin and forced. Arthur's brow furrowed, his gaze flicking to Vanessa, searching. She felt the weight of their eyes, the unspoken pity, and her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. The room seemed to shrink, the air too thick to breathe. "Michael," she said, her voice low, a velvet blade. "You'd be surprised what I'm capable of." He chuckled, oblivious, tossing back his whiskey. "I know exactly what you're capable of, love. Throwing the best parties in Chicago." He turned to the group, raising his glass. "To my wife, the queen of aesthetics." The toast drew polite claps, but Vanessa's smile was a mask, her jaw tight enough to ache. Inside, her thoughts churned, a storm of numbers and contracts, of years spent hiding. She'd bought her first property at 24, outmaneuvered brokers twice her age, and built an empire while Michael dismissed her as a decorative accessory. The hydrangeas, those lush, costly blooms he mocked, were her sanctuary, their delicate petals a counterpoint to the steel of her calculations. She'd tended them late at night, her mind mapping investments while he slept. And the porcelain? Each piece was a trophy, chosen not for beauty, but for the deals they marked, hidden in plain sight. She stepped away, her heels clicking softly, and found herself by the garden doors again. The lake's breeze slipped through, cool against her flushed skin. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat. A war drum, steady and fierce. 10 years of silence, of letting him believe she was less. Why? Because she loved him once. Loved the man who'd promised forever under a starlit sky. But that man was gone, replaced by this one, who wielded her love like a leash. "Vanessa, you all right?" A friend, Lila, touched her arm, her eyes soft with concern. Lila had seen the jabs before, the way Michael's words cut deeper each time. "I'm fine," Vanessa lied, her voice steady but her fingers trembling. She glanced back at Michael, now laughing with another investor, his voice rising as he prepared for his big speech. She knew that tone, the prelude to something bigger, sharper, meant to cement his dominance. Her stomach twisted, a premonition of the humiliation to come. "Lila," she said softly, her eyes never leaving Michael. "Stay for his speech. It's going to be memorable." Lila frowned, sensing the shift in Vanessa's tone, but nodded. Vanessa straightened, her spine steel, her red dress a banner of defiance. The storm inside her was no longer content to simmer. It was rising, clawing, ready to break. She took a step toward the center of the room, her pulse a rhythm of resolve. Michael was about to raise his glass again, to claim the spotlight as his own. But tonight, she thought, I'm done playing small. Vanessa's heels struck the marble floor, each step a metronome counting down to detonation. The room pulsed with chatter, glasses clinking like fragile promises, but her focus narrowed to Michael, his silhouette framed against the golden chandelier glow. His voice boomed, commanding the crowd, his whiskey glass raised like a scepter. Her heart thudded, a war drum echoing in her ribs as she wove through the sea of suits and sequins. Her red silk dress clung to her, a crimson warning, but her smile remained, sharp, honed, a blade sheathed in velvet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael called, his grin wide, his steel blue eyes glinting with the thrill of performance. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of building something extraordinary, and none of it would be possible without my beautiful wife, Vanessa, who makes every moment sparkle. The crowd applauded, a wave of polite enthusiasm. But Vanessa's fingers tightened around her champagne flute, the crystal biting into her palm. She felt their eyes. Arthur Klein's curious gaze, Lila's quiet worry, the fleeting pity of strangers. Her pulse roared, drowning out the music, as Michael's voice took on that familiar edge, the one that always preceded a cut. Vanessa's a genius at aesthetics, he continued, his tone syrupy with condescension. Those hydrangeas out there? Her obsession. Costs a fortune. But she's got a knack for spending my money on pretty things. Porcelain, flowers, you name it. But let's be real. He paused, his laugh sharp, slicing through the air. Don't ask her about real estate. That's too complex for her. Let's just say less than sharp mind. The room froze. A woman gasped softly, her glass clinking against the table. Arthur Klein's brow furrowed, his lips parting as if to speak, but silence smothered the crowd. Vanessa stood rooted, her breath shallow, the word gok-ngek searing her mind like a brand. Her skin prickled, heat flooding her cheeks, but her eyes locked on Michael's, unyielding. He met her gaze, his grin faltering for a split second, a flicker of unease in his eyes. But he pressed on, oblivious to the fault line he'd just cracked open. Anyway, he said, recovering with a chuckle, she's the best at what she does, making me look good. Right, darling? Her smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened, the flute trembling in her grip. Inside, a dam broke. 10 years of swallowed slights, of his voice drowning hers, of his laughter at her expense. It surged, a molten tide of rage and grief. Her mind flashed to the nights she'd spent poring over contracts, her fingers smudged with ink, while he slept. The South Side lot she'd turned into gold, the billions she'd woven through shadows, all to let him believe he was the sun. And now this, her intelligence reduced to a punchline before Chicago's elite. Lila stepped closer, her hand brushing Vanessa's arm. You okay? She whispered, her voice tight with anger. Vanessa didn't answer, her gaze still fixed on Michael. Her chest ached, as if her heart were clawing its way out. She saw herself at 24, signing her first deed, her hands shaking with pride. She saw the boardrooms she dominated under aliases, the deals that funded his precious Warrick Tower. And she saw him, night after night, dismissing her as a decorative afterthought, his words carving away pieces of her until she'd almost forgotten who she was. Vanessa? Arthur Klein's voice was low, cautious, his eyes searching hers. He'd caught the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. The room was a held breath, waiting. She stepped forward, her heels echoing in the silence. Her pulse pounded, but her voice, when it came, was steady, a low hum of power. Michael, she said, her smile a crescent moon, sharp and cold. That was quite the introduction. His grin wavered, his hand tightening on his glass. Just having fun, love, he said, his tone light but his eyes darting, sensing the shift. You know how I get. Oh, I know, she replied, her voice silk over steel. She raised her flute, the champagne catching the light like liquid fire. And since you've so kindly highlighted my less than sharp mind, I think it's only fair I share a little about my obsessions. The crowd leaned in, their whispers fading. Lila's hand fell away, her eyes wide with anticipation. Arthur Klein tilted his head, a spark of curiosity in his gaze. Vanessa's heart raced, but her mind was clear, a ledger of numbers and truths ready to spill. She saw the hydrangeas outside, their lush blooms a mockery of Michael's dismissal, and the porcelain in her study, each piece a silent testament to her victories. She'd built an empire while he laughed, and now the weight of her silence was a weapon in her hands. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice rising, clear and commanding, I'd like to propose a toast. 10 years of marriage, and to the things we hide to keep the ones we love happy. Her eyes locked on Michael's, a challenge, a promise. But tonight, I'm done hiding. His face paled, the glass slipping slightly in his hand. The room held its breath, the air thick with expectation. Vanessa's smile deepened, a predator's calm before the strike. She felt the storm inside her crest, ready to crash over everything he'd built on her silence. Her fingers brushed the phone in her clutch, the key to her empire, and she knew. The next words she spoke would change everything. Vanessa's voice sliced through the silence, each word a honed blade, deliberate and unyielding. Her champagne flute gleamed in her hand, a fragile prop against the fire in her chest. The crowd stood frozen, their eyes pinned to her, as if the room itself held its breath. Michael's face drained of color, his whiskey glass trembling, a faint clink against his ring betraying his unease. Her red silk dress shimmered, a beacon in the golden light, but her gaze was a storm, locked on him, daring him to look away. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone smooth but edged with steel, "my husband thinks I'm only good for spending his money on hydrangeas and porcelain. A less than sharp mind," he said. A murmur rippled through the guests, a mix of shock and anticipation. She paused, letting the words hang, poison in the air. "But let me tell you about my real obsession." She drew her phone from her clutch, her movements precise, almost ceremonial. Her thumb swiped the screen, pulling up a document that glowed like a loaded gun. 12 years ago, she began, her voice rising, clear and resonant. "I bought a vacant lot in South Side. Nothing special, just dirt and dreams. I was 24, fresh out of Northwestern with a master's in economics. While Michael slept, I built something from that dirt." Her eyes flicked to him, catching the twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened on his glass. "That lot," she continued, "became the cornerstone of an empire. 60% of Warrick Realty's projects, yes, including your precious Warrick Tower, Michael, are mine. I own them. And 3 of Chicago's largest real estate funds, worth $2.3 billion. She turned the phone toward the crowd, a spreadsheet projected on a nearby screen, rows of contracts and figures blazing in stark clarity. "Not bad for someone who only spends money, wouldn't you say?" The room erupted in gasps, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the air dry. Arthur Klein's eyes widened, his glass frozen mid-sip. Lila's hand flew to her mouth, her whisper of Jesus barely audible. A woman in diamonds dropped her clutch, the clatter echoing like a gunshot. Michael staggered back a step, his face a mask of disbelief, his whiskey splashing onto his cuff. "Vanessa," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "What the hell are you talking about?" She didn't flinch, her smile a crescent of ice. "I'm talking about the truth, Michael. The truth you never bothered to see." Her words cut deeper than his laughter ever had, each syllable a reckoning. Her heart pounded a wild rhythm, but her hands were steady, her voice a blade honed by years of silence. "Those hydrangeas you mock? I tended them while planning deals that funded your empire. That porcelain? Each piece marks a victory you never knew about. And while you called me gawk and catch, I controlled the board you played on." His mouth opened, then closed, his eyes darting to the crowd as if seeking an ally. But the faces around him, Arthur's calculating stare, Lila's fierce nod, offered no rescue. The air crackled with their judgment, their whispers a rising tide. "She owns Warrick Tower?" a man muttered. "How did he not know?" another hissed. Vanessa felt their gazes shift, no longer pitying but awestruck, as if seeing her for the first time. "Vanessa, stop this," Michael said, his voice low, almost pleading, but laced with a desperate edge. "You're making a scene. We can talk privately." "Privately?" She arched a brow, her laugh soft but biting. "Like all the times you explained real estate to me like I was a child? Or when you laughed me off in front of your partners? No, Michael, you chose this stage." Her chest tightened, a pang of grief for the love she'd once poured into him, now curdled by his betrayal. But her resolve was iron, forged in the fires of his dismissals. She turned to the crowd, her voice ringing clear. "Starting tomorrow, my assets move to the Coleman Fund, focused on affordable housing and community growth in Southside. Warrick Realty will need to find new capital, without me." The words landed like a thunderclap, and Michael's glass slipped, whiskey pooling on the floor. His eyes met hers, wide with panic, the realization dawning that his empire was hers to dismantle. Arthur Klein stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Vanessa, this is extraordinary. Those funds, you've been behind them all along?" His tone held respect, a shift that stung Michael more than the whispers. "Yes," she said simply, her gaze never leaving Michael's. "And every deal was legal, every contract airtight. I didn't hide to deceive you, Michael. I hid to protect us, but you broke that trust tonight. Her heart ached, a raw wound beneath her armor, but her spine remained straight, her eyes unyielding. She saw him now, not the man she'd loved, but the one who'd needed her small to feel big. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a chorus of awe and judgment, and Lila's hand found hers, squeezing tight. Vanessa's pulse thundered, but her mind was clear. A ledger of truths finally laid bare. She stepped back, her heels clicking, her red dress aflame against the room's golden haze. To truth, she said, raising her flute, her voice a quiet command. The crowd echoed her, glasses rising, but Michael stood frozen, his world crumbling in her shadow. She turned toward the garden doors, her breath steadying, the storm inside her no longer caged but soaring. Tonight, she thought, I am free. Vanessa's heels sank into the soft earth of the garden, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the heat still burning in her veins. The lake's whispers mingled with the distant hum of the party, now fractured by her revelation. Her red silk dress clung to her, heavy with the weight of truth, but her shoulders were unbowed, her breath steadying as she faced the dark water. Behind her, the murmurs of the crowd buzzed like static, their shock a living thing. But it was Michael's silence that cut deepest, a void where his voice should have been. Vanessa! His shout broke the quiet, raw and jagged, as he stumbled through the garden doors. His navy suit was rumpled, whiskey stains blooming on his cuff, his face a map of rage and desperation. What the hell was that? His voice cracked, loud enough to draw eyes from the lingering guests inside. You stand there, humiliating me in front of everyone. And for what? To prove a point? She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his, her gaze a blade tempered by years of swallowed pain. Her fingers twitched, itching to clutch the phone still warm in her clutch, its documents a shield and a sword. Humiliating you? Her voice was low, a velvet lash, each word deliberate. You called me stupid, Michael. In front of Chicago's elite. You reduced me to hydrangeas and porcelain, and now you're shocked I've shown you who I am? His jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. You've been lying to me for years, hiding billions, controlling my company behind my back. He took a step closer, his breath sharp with whiskey, his eyes wild with betrayal. You made me look like a fool, Vanessa. My partners, Arthur, everyone, they're questioning me now. Her laugh was soft, bitter, slicing through the night. You made yourself a fool. Her chest tightened, a knot of grief and fury twisting inside. She saw him as he was 10 years ago, his smile warm under a starlit sky, promising forever. But that man was gone, buried under his need to tower over her. I built an empire to keep us together, to let you shine, and you thanked me by calling me Ngach. Michael flinched, her words hitting like a slap. He raked a hand through his blonde hair, his voice dropping to a hiss. I didn't mean it like that. You know I didn't. I was just playing to the room. Playing? Her eyes flashed, her nails digging into her palms, the pain grounding her. Every jab, every laugh at my expense, was that all a game? The dinners where you explained real estate to me like I was a child? The meetings where you cut me off? Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of a decade's wounds. I hid my empire to protect you, Michael. To protect us. But tonight, you broke that. He staggered back, as if her words were physical blows. His eyes darted to the windows, where shadows of guests lingered, their whispers a low hum. Arthur Klein stood among them, his silhouette still watching. Michael's face crumpled, a mix of shame and defiance. So what now? You destroy my company? Take everything. Vanessa's heart ached, a raw wound beneath her resolve. She remembered nights in her study, the glow of her laptop casting shadows as she signed contracts, her hydrangeas blooming outside like silent witnesses. Each deal was a brick in her empire, each porcelain piece a marker of her triumphs, triumphs she'd buried to keep him whole. I don't want to destroy you, she said, her voice softening, but her eyes were steel. I want you to see me. See you? He laughed, a hollow sound. I see a liar who played me for a decade. Her breath caught, a sharp pang in her chest. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath, to see the veins pulsing in his neck. "A liar," she whispered, her voice a blade's edge. "I have contracts, Michael. Spreadsheets. Every deal legal, every dollar earned. I built this while you slept, while you mocked my pretty things. You want proof?" She pulled her phone, swiping to a folder of documents, titles, deeds, financials. "Look, or are you too scared to face the truth?" He stared at the screen, his hands trembling, but he didn't reach for it. His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something flicker. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. But it vanished, replaced by a stubborn set to his jaw. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low, a warning. "We'll talk at home." "No," she said, her voice steady, a quiet thunder. "We're done talking on your terms." She stepped back, her heels sinking deeper into the earth, grounding her. "You have a choice, Michael. Respect me as your equal, in our marriage, in our business, or I walk away with my assets. Warrick Realty survives because of me. Don't forget that." His mouth opened, but no words came. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a tide of judgment washing over him. Lila appeared at the garden doors, her eyes fierce with support, but Vanessa didn't need it. Her pulse was a drumbeat, steady and fierce, her truth a fire no longer contained. She turned toward the lake, the dark water reflecting her silhouette, a woman no longer hidden, no longer small. "Choose wisely," she said over her shoulder, her voice a promise and a threat. The night swallowed her words, but they lingered, heavy, as Michael stood alone, the weight of his mistakes pressing down. She felt the storm inside her shift, no longer raging but resolute, ready to reshape their world. Michael stood alone in the garden, the lake's dark ripples swallowing the last of Vanessa's words. His whiskey glass hung limp in his hand, the amber liquid catching the moonlight like a dying ember. His chest heaved, each breath a jagged effort, as if the air itself had turned against him. The party's hum drifted from the villa, a fading pulse, but the weight of 100 eyes still pressed against his skin, a judging, whispering, unraveling the man he'd built himself to be. His pulse thundered, a frantic rhythm, but it was Vanessa's face, her eyes sharp with pain and power, that burned behind his lids. He sank onto a stone bench, the cold seeping through his suit, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. His fingers trembled, the glass slipping to the grass with a soft thud. How did I not see her? The question clawed at him, raw and relentless. He saw her now, not the poised wife in red silk, but the woman who'd outmaneuvered him, who'd built an empire while he'd laughed at her hydrangeas. Her hydrangeas, those lush, costly blooms he'd mocked as frivolous. He remembered her tending them at dawn, her hands gentle but sure, and now he wondered. What else had he missed in those quiet moments? "Michael." Arthur Klein's voice cut through the haze, low and measured. The older man stood at the garden's edge, his silver hair glinting, his eyes unreadable. "We need to talk." Michael's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "Not now, Arthur." His voice was rough, fraying at the edges, but he couldn't meet the man's gaze. Arthur was his biggest investor, his anchor in the cutthroat world of real estate, and now he was a witness to his unraveling. Arthur didn't move. "You didn't know, did you? About Vanessa?" His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried a weight that made Michael's stomach lurch. "She's been running the show, your show, for years." Michael's laugh was hollow, a sound scraped from his throat. "She's my wife, Arthur. I'd know if—" He stopped, the lie choking him. He hadn't known. He'd seen her as an accessory, a beautiful shadow to his spotlight. The memory of her voice, steady and searing, echoed. "I hid to protect us." His chest ached, a bruise forming where pride had once lived. Arthur stepped closer, his shadow falling across the bench. "I've worked with you for a decade, Michael. I trusted your vision. But tonight I'm wondering if I backed the wrong player." His words were soft, but they landed like blows. "Vanessa's fund. She's moving it. If she pulls out, Warrick Realty's done. You know that." Michael's head snapped up. his eyes wild. She wouldn't. But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Vanessa's face flashed in his mind, her chin lifted, her gaze unyielding. She'd meant every word. His hands raked through his hair, tugging hard, as if pain could drown the panic rising in his throat. He saw their life together, the villa, the private jets, the parties like this one, all funded by her silent empire. And he'd thanked her with jabs, with laughter, with ngok. He remembered a night years ago, her sitting across from him at dinner, her eyes bright as she mentioned a Southside project. He'd cut her off, chuckling about her cute ideas, and she'd gone quiet, her smile fading. He'd thought it was shyness, not strategy. Now the memory twisted like a knife. How many times had he dismissed her? How many victories had she buried to keep him whole? "Michael, you listening?" Arthur's voice sharpened, pulling him back. "My partners are already talking. They want to meet with Vanessa, not you. You need to fix this." "Fix it?" Michael's voice cracked, his laugh bitter. "She's the one who blindsided me." But the words felt hollow, a child's tantrum. He saw her again, standing in the villa's glow, her red dress aflame, her voice commanding the room. He'd always thought he was the sun, but she was a supernova, and he'd been too blind to see. He stood, his legs unsteady, and glanced at the villa. Shadows moved behind the windows, guests whispering, their judgment a noose tightening around him. He thought of Warrick Tower, his pride, his legacy, hers all along. His throat burned, a mix of whiskey and shame. He'd built his empire on her silence, and now it teetered on the edge of her truth. "I need to find her," he said, more to himself than Arthur. His voice was low, frayed, but a spark of resolve flickered. He didn't know if it was love or survival driving him, but he couldn't let her walk away. Not like this. His hands shook as he straightened his jacket, the whiskey stain a dark mark against the navy fabric. Arthur watched him, his expression softening. "Don't make it worse, Michael. She's not the woman you thought she was." "I know," Michael whispered, the admission cutting deeper than he expected. He turned toward the garden's far end, where Vanessa had vanished into the shadows. His heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and regret. He'd spent 10 years reducing her to a caricature, hydrangeas, porcelain, a pretty face. Now he faced the real Vanessa, and the weight of his mistakes was a tide pulling him under. He took a step, then another, the grass soft beneath his shoes. The lake's whispers grew louder, urging him forward. He didn't know what he'd say, only that he had to try. The storm she'd unleashed wasn't just hers, it was theirs, and he was running out of time to weather it. The garden's shadows clung to Michael as he moved, his steps unsteady, the grass damp beneath his polished shoes. The lake's whispers hissed against the night, a restless murmur that matched the churn in his chest. His navy suit felt too tight, the whiskey stain on his cuff a brand of his unraveling. Vanessa stood at the garden's edge, her silhouette sharp against the moonlit water, her red silk dress aflame flickering in the dark. Her stillness was a challenge, her silence louder than the crowd's murmurs still echoing from the villa. His heart thudded, a frantic pulse, as he stopped a few feet away, his breath catching like a snagged thread. "Vanessa," he said, his voice raw, fraying at the edges. Her name tasted foreign, heavy with the weight of his mistakes. She didn't turn, her shoulders rigid, her hands clasped loosely before her. The air between them crackled, charged with a decade of unspoken truce. "What do you want, Michael?" Her voice was low, a quiet blade, slicing through the night. She turned then, her eyes catching the moonlight, sharp and unyielding, but shadowed with a pain that made his throat tighten. "Another chance to call me stupid? Or are you here to beg for your company?" He flinched, her words a lash against his raw nerves. His hands flexed, itching to reach for her, but they stayed at his sides, useless. "I was wrong," he said, the admission scraping his throat like glass. "I didn't know. I didn't see you." His voice broke, and he hated the sound of it. Weak, exposed, a man stripped bare. "I'm sorry, Vanessa, for the jabs, the laughter, all of it." Her laugh was soft, bitter, a sound that cut deeper than her anger. "Sorry?" She stepped closer, her heels sinking into the earth, her gaze pinning him like a moth. 10 years, Michael. 10 years of you reducing me to hydrangeas and porcelain, to a pretty face who spends your money. And now because I've shown you the truth, you're sorry? Her voice trembled, not with tears, but with a fury tightly leashed, her fingers curling as if to hold it back. He swallowed, his mouth dry, his mind flashing to the nights he'd dismissed her quiet suggestions at dinner, her careful questions about his deals. He'd laughed, called her ideas cute, never seeing the steel behind her smile. Now her empire loomed in his mind. $2.3 billion, 60% of his projects, her signature on the deeds that held his world together. His stomach lurched, a sickening mix of shame and fear. I didn't know, he whispered, his eyes dropping to the grass. I should have, but I didn't. You didn't want to know. Her voice was steady now, a quiet thunder. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Jasmine, sharp and intoxicating. I hid my empire to keep us whole, Michael, to let you shine. But you took that love and twisted it into a weapon. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with a fire that made his chest ache. You made me small, and I let you. That's my regret. His breath hitched, her words carving into him. He saw her now, really saw her. Not the wife he'd cast as a supporting role, but the woman who'd outplayed him at his own game. His hands shook, and he shoved them into his pockets, trying to anchor himself. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Or the company, but mostly you. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face, as if weighing his soul. Then prove it, she said, her tone a challenge, a dare. You have a choice. We rebuild, as equals, in our marriage, in our business. I lead strategy at Warrick Realty. You keep the public face. Or I walk away with my assets and you start over. Her voice softened, but her gaze held firm. Choose, Michael, but choose with your heart, not your pride. He stood frozen, the weight of her ultimatum pressing down. His mind raced. Warwick Tower, his legacy, teetering on her will. Their marriage, a fragile thread stretched to breaking. He saw the villa, the life they'd built, all propped up by her silent strength. And he saw her pain, raw and real, in the way her fingers trembled, the way her jaw tightened to keep from cracking. Vanessa, he said, stepping closer, his voice thick with something he couldn't name. I want to try, as equals. I'll listen, I'll learn. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to. His hand reached for hers, hesitating, then stopping short. Please. She didn't move, her eyes locked on his, searching for truth. The crowd's murmurs drifted from the villa, a few silhouettes watching through the windows. Lila, Arthur, their judgment a distant hum. Her chest rose and fell, a slow breath, as if testing the air for sincerity. This is your last chance, she said, her voice a quiet vow. Prove it with actions, not words. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Her hand brushed his, a fleeting touch, warm but guarded, and she turned back to the lake. The moonlight caught her profile, fierce and unbroken, a woman no longer hidden. His heart pounded, a drumbeat of hope and fear, as he realized the work ahead. To rebuild not just their marriage, but himself. Vanessa stood at the garden's edge, the lake's dark ripples catching the moon's silver glow. Her red silk dress clung to her, a fading ember in the night, but her heart beat steady, no longer caged by the storm that had raged for a decade. Michael stood beside her, his hand inches from hers, his breath uneven, as if afraid to break the fragile thread between them. The villa's hum drifted out, glasses clinking, voices softening, but the air here was theirs, charged with the weight of a choice made in a future unwritten. Her fingers brushed the edge of her clutch, the phone inside a silent testament to her empire. But it was her own voice she trusted now, sharp and free. She turned to him, her eyes catching his, searching for the man she'd once loved beneath the wreckage of his pride. Let's go back inside, she said, her voice low, a quiet command. We have one last thing to do. Michael nodded, his jaw tight, his navy suit creased from the night's unraveling. His hand hovered near hers, hesitant, as if unsure he'd earned the right to touch her. Together? He asked, his voice raw, a plea wrapped in hope. Together, she said, but her tone held an edge, a reminder that this was a beginning, not a forgiveness. She led the way, her heels clicking against the stone path, her silhouette aflame against the villa's golden light. The crowd parted as they entered, their whispers falling silent, eyes wide with anticipation. Lila stood by the door, her nod fierce with pride. Arthur Klein watched from a corner, his gaze steady, approving. Vanessa's chest tightened, not with fear but with the weight of her own power, finally claimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, stepping to the center of the room, her voice clear, resonant, a bell tolling the end of an era. "Thank you for being here to celebrate our 10 years." She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd, lingering on Michael. "Tonight you've seen the truth of who I am, and I'm not done." Her fingers tightened around her champagne flute, the crystal cool against her palm. "I'm launching the Coleman Fund, effective immediately. It will focus on affordable housing and community growth in Southside. My home, my heart." Her voice softened, but her eyes blazed. "Every dollar I've earned, every deal I've made, will build something lasting. Not just for me, but for those who've been overlooked." The room erupted in applause, a thunderous wave that shook the air. Lila's eyes glistened, her hands clapping fiercely. Arthur raised his glass, his smile a quiet endorsement. Vanessa's heart swelled, a warmth spreading where pain had once lived. She saw her younger self, standing in that Southside lot, dirt under her nails, dreams in her veins. The hydrangeas in the garden, the porcelain in her study, they weren't just distractions. They were her anchors, proof she could create beauty while building an empire. She turned to Michael, her gaze steady. "Michael has something to say," she said, stepping aside, her voice a challenge and an invitation. He cleared his throat, his hands trembling as he faced the crowd. His face was pale, the whiskey stain on his cuff a stark reminder of his fall. I owe you all an apology," he said, his voice low but gaining strength. "Most of all, I owe one to Vanessa." He turned to her, his eyes raw, unguarded. "I didn't see her, not the woman she is, not the empire she built. I was wrong, and I'm grateful she's giving me a chance to make it right." The crowd murmured, a mix of surprise and respect. Vanessa's breath caught, her chest aching with a flicker of hope, but her eyes remained wary, testing his words against the scars he'd left. "We're moving forward," he continued, his voice steadier. "Warrick Realty will continue, but with Vanessa leading strategy. I'll handle the public face, but she's the vision. She always has been." The applause returned, softer but sincere, a ripple of approval. Arthur stepped forward, clapping Michael on the shoulder, his nod a seal of trust renewed. Vanessa felt the room shift, the weight of judgment lifting, replaced by a tentative faith in their new path. Her fingers brushed her dress, grounding her as she saw their future. Not perfect, but possible. "Michael," she said, her voice soft but firm, meant only for him. "This is just the start. You prove it every day, or I walk." He nodded, his eyes locked on hers, a vow in their depths. "I will," he whispered, his hand finally finding hers, warm but tentative. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back, her touch a promise held in reserve. They raised their glasses together, the crowd joining in, a chorus of clinks and cheers. "To new beginnings," Vanessa said, her voice ringing clear, a beacon in the haze. The room echoed her, glasses glinting, but her eyes were on the lake beyond, its dark expanse a mirror to her heart. Vast, uncharted, free. As the music swelled, she stepped toward the garden doors, Michael at her side. The night air greeted her, cool and sharp, and she felt the weight of her truth settle. Not a burden, but a crown. The storm was gone, replaced by a quiet strength, a woman no longer hidden, ready to build again. As the echoes of their glasses fade into the night, Vanessa and Michael step into a dawn of equals. Raw, real, and rebuilt. This tale of hidden strengths and reclaimed truths reminds us. Love thrives not in shadows, but in the fierce light of honesty. What moved you most? The sting of dismissal, the thrill of revelation, or the fragile hope of redemption? Share your thoughts below, Your voices fuel these stories. Thank you for journeying with us. Your hearts made this magic. Stay tuned for the next chapter of Lives Boldly Rewritten. Until then, shine unapologetically.